most out of teaching online. And this has been a hot topic, I think, over the last couple of months, especially with COVID and libraries shifting to ways to support students teaching online, whether they have resources or faculty looking to utilize those resources in a classroom environment. So we're pleased today to have with us two special guests. And before we get to the introductions, I did want to remind folks that we are recording this session, so we will send out following this session a recording for your follow-up or reference. So we look forward to sharing that with you. And we also ask that if you have any questions during the session, to please post to the Q&A function within Zoom. And we will be keeping track of those. And then towards the end, we will have a Q&A session with our guests, and we'll look forward to answering those questions that you raise. So with that, I did want to introduce our special guest. Oh, let me back that up a minute. So Lindsay Jervis is a digital learning manager with Gale, and she assists in the learning design and development of Gale's digital scholarship program. And she also supports many of our Gale customers as they are transitioning to that remote teaching environment. So Lindsay is here and joining us today. Thank you, Lindsay. And also Sarah Catchley, who's an affiliate instructor with the University of Washington. Sarah is an Egyptologist with a specialty in art history in the first millennium BCE. And she is co-founder of New Book Digital Texts and teaches an introduction to digital humanities at UW. And so with that, we're looking forward to having a conversation with both of them today, and I will turn it over to Lindsay.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for the intro, Roger. As you all know, we've found ourselves in this rush to transition, whether fully online or hybrid. And for many, this has changed the way we design our courses. A study done by Bayview Analytics indicated that 97% of faculty reported they had no prior experience teaching online. And with great urgency, we can imagine how many have faced a greater need for digital materials. And then more so, ideation around creative ways we can engage with our students that may also meet the same outcomes that our in-person courses did. That alignment between effective online course design and outcomes is absolutely critical. And it certainly weighs heavily for our students, our faculty, and parents as well, who are looking to get that return on investment. And that's exactly why we're here today. As Roger said, I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Sarah Catchley, who is an affiliated instructor at the University of Washington. So thank you for joining us, Sarah. Let's start off, and could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into teaching online?
Yeah, thanks so much, Roger and Lindsay, for the introductions. And I'm really delighted to be joining you all today to talk about my experiences, which I don't think are unique in any way as we transition from in-person to online teaching. And so to give a bit of background, as Roger mentioned, I have a PhD in Egyptology and Egyptian history, art history of the first millennium. And about 10 years ago, I found a Nile travel journal in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And it changed the trajectory of my career, of my way of working. And it led me down the path of working digitally with primary source materials. The journal is very important for the early history of Egyptology, late 19th century, the so-called Golden Age. And I decided that I wanted to transcribe it, to encode it and publish it online in an open source manner. And at that point, it became apparent that it would take years for me to do the work by myself. There are 19 volumes of the diary. And so I began partnering with undergraduate student interns at the University of Washington. And they helped me with all aspects of the work, ranging from the initial transcriptions. And of course, our archive has expanded to include a lot more 19th century material. So they work with me transcribing, encoding, they work on websites, marketing, project management, they create maps, data visualizations, etc. All of this led to the establishment of New Book Digital Texts, which I co-founded with a couple of faculty partners at the University of Washington. And from this early work in DH, we were funded for me to develop and begin teaching introductory level classes in digital humanities, which I've taught 8 times now. And 3 of those classes have been online at the University of Washington. So I began in the summer of 2019 teaching for the UW online, and to a degree I feel very lucky that I had those initial dry runs, because it enabled me to begin thinking about how I wanted to structure and deliver that type of experience to students. I'm also an adjunct associate professor at the University of Maryland Global Campus, where I teach asynchronous classes to quite a diverse adult student population. A lot of military students in my class, a lot of learners also balancing full-time jobs, families, etc. So that also helped refine my thinking about how best to deliver online classes. And then in terms of our New Book internship program, we also had to transition that to fully online this year, which has been a powerful thing, because I now have students dialing in from Europe and from China as well. The biggest challenge there, of course, is managing time zones. So that's just a bit of an overview of the work that I've been doing.
Where do you find the time, Sarah? Where do you find the time? So what are some things we should know about the types of courses you teach? You gave us some details just now, but more specifically, what are the typical outcomes for those courses?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about those in some detail, and I've prepared a few slides to give a framework, an outline to support what I'm saying here. So hopefully it helps as you follow along, and I'm happy to share these at the end as well. So I basically teach 3 different types of classes. We have the Introduction to Digital Humanities, which is a no prerequisite class. I've taught it through Near Eastern languages and civilizations. I've taught it through informatics. And in the winter quarter of next year, I'll be teaching it in the MLIS program. I teach more data-focused seminars as well, and I generally do those through computational linguistics. And those data-focused working groups also include ongoing work with my New Book interns, some of whom come from computer science, informatics backgrounds, etc. And they're building SQL databases for our project. They are processing transcribed documents using computational methodologies. And then the 3rd type are the disciplinary classes, where I use primary sources that I've gathered in my visits to various archives, and I work on to gain insights into the history of the period. And we also access this material through open source databases, through library databases, like Gale Primary Sources as well. And we use these as a training ground for working with digital tools. I mentioned that there are no prerequisites for the classes. I have students who know how to code, who are very comfortable working with digital tools, and those who are fairly afraid of the process, to be frank. And I generally fill the classes at around 35 students. And as you can see from this demographic breakdown of my summer 2019 class, the class is very much interdisciplinary, students coming from departments across campus. And the outcomes that I hope to achieve have observations in my experience working with New Book interns over the years. And during this time, it became very apparent to me that it was important to foster core computing competencies for humanities and social science students. I mentioned that there's often a lot of fear involved in working with digital tools, and a lot of resistance to it. And I should say it's not just students who are fearful, often faculty are somewhat reluctant to engage with digital humanities methodologies as well. I also aim to promote interdisciplinarity and collaboration. As you can see from this demographic breakdown, it's very important to do so. It's always front and foremost in my thinking. And then the basis of all my work is using digital tools to investigate humanities data. So I hope that answers the question, Lindsay.
In so many different ways. Thank you for that. You know, it's interesting when we have such a wide array of students like you do across disciplines and capabilities. You know, one of the things that we run into is how do we keep our students engaged? And a study performed by the Canvas LMS provider on over 7,000 students indicated that they felt that online courses need to be intentionally designed. And as someone who has engaged with students both in person and online, what does this mean to you? And what are the most important things to remember when delivering an engaging online course, especially to such a wide array of students?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I thought very hard about it. And it struck me that I almost design my classes back to front. So I begin with the end goals. Where do I want to end up? Or in other words, the learning objectives for the class. I begin with the learning objectives. And I do these in a two-tiered way. Having such a broad demographic in my classes means that I want to meet the needs of those who seek to develop a basic understanding, as well as those who come perhaps with a more developed skill set and want to push to a next level. So I usually build two sets of learning objectives, basic and advanced, for my class. And then I think about the skills that students would need to develop in order to successfully achieve those learning objectives. And so as an example of this, for a disciplinary course I taught in Near Eastern languages and civilizations, one of my learning outcomes was that students would gain a general understanding of Nile travel at the end of the 19th century while choosing one theme to study in depth using digital text analysis tools. And so one of the students chose to study books that travelers read while they were voyaging the Nile, and another looked at travelers' gastric maladies and various remedies for them. And then another learning outcome was to understand the process of generating OCR from digital primary sources. I wanted students to really understand where the data that they were working with came from, how it was generated. And then also building workflows for working with data sets from this collection of material. And then continuing with this intentional design theme, what I aim to develop in my classes before I kick things off is essentially a package of course collateral for these online classes. And this includes a range of contextual reading and viewing for each aspect, say each module or each topic we're covering. And I supplement this with pre-recorded lectures, some of which I do, some of which I draw from other sources. And the advantage of providing these pre-recorded lectures is that students can refer back to them later. They can revisit them if necessary. They can watch them whenever they want as well. So they're not kind of bounded in space and time at all. And these lectures form the basis of some of our in-class discussions, which take place in an asynchronous online course by necessity on the discussion board. And we have some great discussions on the discussion board. I use tools like Camtasia, Loom. I use Apple Screen Capture for recording these videos, or I even record a Zoom meeting with myself and export it as an MP4. And then I upload these videos to a private channel on YouTube. And then we use the Canvas LMS, and I'm able to embed those videos directly into Canvas. So it makes for a very streamlined experience for students. I use PowerPoint and Google Slides as well, which automatically add closed captioning, which is very useful. And then I also generate some other material to facilitate online classroom management, like administration documents that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily think about, but these are, say, instructions for a TA. I write fairly granular week by week instructions to guide the TA in grading, in interaction with students, etc. For the type of class I'm teaching, I have to generate a lot of technical documentation, which is a different type of writing to, say, academic or writing for a public audience. You have to think very carefully about clarity. I offer multiple versions of instructions for using digital tools. So there'll be written, there might be annotated images, recorded walkthroughs, etc. And the goal is essentially to provide a scaffolded document so that students can build their projects. And then we have the issues of building effective pathways for communication and also soliciting feedback, which I'll touch on a bit later. And then finally, it's very important that there's scope in an intentionally designed class for me to be able to give up a bit of control, essentially, over the classroom. And trust my students to follow along with what I've provided and to really immerse themselves in the learning process, which is very important for the type of project-based work that we're doing in class. And to a degree, I'm more of an overall project manager, which doesn't mean that I don't teach, but the teaching and learning take place against the backdrop of hands-on project work.
Yeah, and I just want to take a moment and illuminate the best practices that Sarah just described to put a name to the face of starting with the learning objectives. That's called backwards design in instructional design, when you use those specific skills that you want your students to learn and those outcomes to be the inspiration for the assets that you create for the rest of your course. So and you know, all of these fabulous course collateral, including administrative documents and platforms of communication, really lend itself to developing a really effective online learning experience, which is really essential for making sure that the experience is seamless for our students. Because, you know, oftentimes, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Sarah, it's really very easy for our students to get frustrated along the way when it's going from text to their videos, mm-hmm. to the discussions. So ensuring that you have that momentum and that experience integrated within the course development and design is really essential for, you know, the success of the course, so that you're not so much bogged down by the technicalities of everything. I'm sure you've experienced that yourself. You know, one thing, it's interesting, you've taught online before, Sarah, especially before COVID, but how do you think COVID has still impacted your online delivery? And what challenges have you faced with your students, or even in just the design of your courses?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of things to say about the kind of COVID situation. So in terms of engagement, I touched on communication briefly in my last slide, and it's very important even in asynchronous classes. And so one of the things I've really focused on is making sure that I'm accessible to students, which I found can make the difference between success and failure. So I try very hard to really notice what's going on behind the scenes. You know, I do check to see that students are engaging in the classroom. Canvas has a way of you know, I can see how long students spend in the classroom, and if I feel students aren't truly engaging, I may reach out to them, or say they are submitting assignments late. I'll just kind of pop up and say, you know, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything I can help with? And I found that students really appreciate that. They appreciate that personal touch, particularly in an asynchronous class where it may be the only kind of almost face-to-face contact you have with your instructor. Having said that, I always also offer office hours for asynchronous classes. Students can sign up. I have an app called Calendly, where they can book appointments with me, and a goodly number of them do take advantage of that. And they're also welcome to email me, send me messages and Canvas as well. I do try to be very clear at the beginning of class about expectations, you know, when students can expect a reply, and if they haven't had a reply in that time period, it's totally fine to ping me again. And I have made myself accessible in the evenings and at weekends in recognition of, you know, students' timetables outside of the classroom, and the fact that some students may be dialing in from outside the US as well. It's important to bear that in mind. I also strive to be authentic in all my communications. I strive to be myself in my communications with students, to develop that measure of trust and camaraderie that we develop in an in-person classroom. We have multiple methods for engagement, and this includes both course delivery. I've mentioned video, audio, written materials, etc. Also, the way that students can submit assignments. Perhaps we have some students who might want to provide a recording. They might want to narrate their answers. They might want to submit a video, or they might want to submit a more traditional written piece. And then I also provide multiple ways for students to communicate in class. We have Slack, which tends to be pretty casual and chatty, and I've found that there's a lot of inter-class communication that goes on Slack. And then we obviously have the more formal discussions, which I generate the question to kick things off on the Canvas discussion boards. I strive to provide a very clear flow and structure for the syllabus, which might vary according to the class. So as an example of that, when I teach for Maryland, I mentioned that, you know, I do have a lot of military and adult learners. And so I do release all the modules at the very beginning of the class. But I time limit the assignments, so they can only submit them after a certain date. And I regulate the flow of the class in that way. And I do that in recognition of the fact that many of the students are finding slivers of time between their families, between their jobs, and even, you know, military exercises. So I want to be respectful of their situations. But for the more traditional online classroom, where all the students are full-time learners at the University of Washington, I tend to release one module a week so that we work through the material as a cohort. And it's really important to understand the demographics of the class when you're planning its structure. and, you know, before you kick things off and make the decisions about how you're going to release modules, etc. Feedback is really important. I look to the discussion thread for this. And then I've mentioned the multiple methods that students can contact me. And then finally, I make sure that we have an engaging end goal to try and maintain interest and momentum. I give all students scope to have a learning experience that's relevant to their own interests and learning goals. So I let them choose projects that they find interesting, and then we use digital tools to engage with material that they have chosen to work with. And I also aim to tie weekly assignments directly to that end goal, so that there's a sense of cumulative forward movement.
Yeah, I think all of these attributes are definitely, they establish the structure that's needed, especially for the students who have not taken as many online courses, and you know, after during COVID are coming into this. So you know, these setting expectations and developing what we say in digital learning are called teaching presence and social presence are more important than ever. And these are just really, really great ways to represent those two types of presence in online learning. So this is really great. And I really loved, Sarah, how you mentioned, you know, we need to appreciate the demographic that we're teaching, right? And the circumstances that these demographics find themselves in, especially during this pandemic, right? So let's go back and talk about outcomes, because surveys all around the world are indicating that students just really want to be ready for their careers and take courses that will holistically prepare them for that. So how do you make that happen online? And what are the key skills that you integrate within the content of your courses?
Another great question. So there are a number of ways I try to make what I'm teaching relevant. And this is often a discussion we have with humanities-based classes. You know, how can these be relevant for the outside world, for the job market? And so I tend to build my classes around projects. So the work we do in class builds cumulatively towards a final project. And this is still the case in my online classes as well. And there are a number of skills that play into building a successfully completed project. The first is project management. Students learn how to manage their own workflows and projects. A project has a defined starting point, and then this may be a technology trigger of some point, and then also has a defined endpoint. And this is somewhat arbitrary, of course, in the classroom, because the starting point is the first day of class and the endpoint is when they submit their final project. However, that cycle is very applicable outside of the university atmosphere. You know, it's how industry works. And so that getting into that frame of thinking is very relevant. Anyway, students also learn to define and then manage the scope of their work. You know, they come up with fantastic project ideas, and then they find that they're either overwhelmed with data or they don't have enough. So they begin to evaluate what they've got and fit it to the time that they have available. And I think grounding work in reality is a great practical exercise, and something that's very valuable, again, in the real world. And especially now that so many of us are working virtually as well, and we have to manage our own time outside of the office. Students work with a backdrop of time constraints, As I mentioned, this is the 10-week university quarter, and at the end of it, they have a deliverable. In this case, it's the final project. Students are expected to communicate clearly and effectively in the written material that they submit for their final projects. And these aren't so much oral projects in an asynchronous online class. They tend to be written projects. And the final project does go through a series of edits, since they build on to their final project work. There is an opportunity to work collaboratively online, and developing responsible working practices, showing up when they say they're going to show up, etc. We work often with Google Docs. They use a collaborative working document whereby they agree to team working practices, how they're going to meet, etc. And then there's the digital literacy factor, which I'll touch on momentarily. But to give you a sense of what this looks like in practice. So the foundation of the class centers around planning. Planning and management, very relevant to industry. And then we move into the hands-on part of classwork, which is the collecting of data, curating it, moving forward to analysis and visualization. This section of the working process tends to be somewhat iterative in nature. So students will go through multiple cycles of this work while they're refining their research results. And then they finally deliver a final project. And in this case, we use open source online platforms for delivering content. We use platforms like Omeka. We've used story maps, Timeline.js, Neatline, etc. So very much interactive. It's public scholarship, essentially. I did mention digital literacy, and this is something that is front and center of my course planning. As I'm thinking about the learning outcomes, I want to ensure that I'm mapping each stage of the working process to appropriate digital literacies. And this is something that employers are looking for. They want their employees to be comfortable working in an online environment and digitally literate. So some of the literacies that my classes cover include photo-visual literacy, and so that entails understanding workflows, instructions, and messages when they're presented in graphical formats. And these might range from, say, individual icons and symbols, right through to navigating an entire graphical user interface, or GUI. We have reproduction literacy, so students create new meaning and interpretations from disparate information which comes from multiple sources. Information literacy is huge. Students do work through a large volume of historical data in my classes, which they have to assess objectively. They have to discount irrelevant material, while at the same time demonstrating an awareness of bias and falsehood in the material that they're working with. And we have things like socio-emotional literacy. So they develop an understanding of the rules of effective, respectful, and sensitive engagement in an online environment, which includes a willingness to share knowledge while working and learning collaboratively. So I hope that answers your question, Lindsay.
It really does. And first of all, this curriculum and literacies slide is just a beautiful thing for my eyes. But, just to take a step back, you mentioned project-based learning earlier. And this is one of the types of learning environments that are for the longest time, it's just continuously picking up popularity especially in in-person classrooms, online courses. And just for our audience, project-based learning is everything that has all the components that Sarah described, in order to allow students to explore and investigate and think about complex questions or phenomena throughout the span of a course, right? And it oftentimes is very inquiry based, and as Sarah said, very collaborative. And it's more than just doing a project. It's actually it they say it's like a lifestyle, but it really is, like, that really cheesy saying, but it really is a lifestyle. It's about being able to manage your workflow and that project to meet its end. And so if I'm a faculty member, right, I'm thinking, this sounds so scary to put online. How in the world do you do this? So could you speak to how you integrate project-based learning into your online courses and how it sort of fits into the scope and sequence of your course? And I do want to just take a step back again and say, going back to when Sarah was talking about relevance, it really, as librarians and faculty within this project-based learning environment, it is all about how do you make the content relevant for your students and really illuminating that. So anyway, going back to how it fits into the scope and sequence of an online course, how in the world do we do that, Sarah?
Well, I have a number of strategies, many of which I've learned the hard way by doing the complete opposite, I will confess. I do have, some formal training, but like most university faculty, we're not trained teachers. We rely on our community and resources that the university offers us for improving our teaching and course delivery. So some of the things that I do in my project-based classes, I generally, as you may have gathered, teach a class which uses technology in the form of tools for text analysis, for dataset building, cleaning OCR text, etc. I found that it's really wise, in fact, imperative, to limit the number of tools or platforms that students use, so that they have the opportunity, firstly, to gain a deeper understanding of the resources that they're using. But from my perspective, from a classroom management perspective, limiting tools makes the class run much more smoothly. There's really less to fix when it goes wrong. It's not an if, it's as I've found, usually a when. I also use cloud-based tools. Versus those which need installing on a local machine. And some of these include, I've used Gale's Digital Scholar Lab, which is cloud-based, Voyant, I've used Lexos, and StoryMap.js I've referenced as well. So all of these are cloud-based. They don't require local installation. And this is very important because students do bring all sorts of different machines to the learning environment, and it's not possible to troubleshoot all of them. I endeavored to break down tasks and processes into manageable chunks which progress towards the final project. And I asked that students complete a work log each week as their main weekly assignment. And that gets them into a mindset of thinking about what they're doing as they're doing it, and also why they're doing it as well. If things go wrong, they can reflect back on their practice and identify A, where things went wrong, and B, how they might do it differently next time. And I'm always very clear with students that they get full grades, even if things don't work or their analyses fail, provided that they've fully documented the process in their work log. And the work log also gives me an opportunity when they submit it to check their process and their understanding as well, so I can give immediate feedback to each student. I also rely very heavily on librarians and fellow faculty members for advice. I also invite some of the DH or digital scholarship specialists on campus to help in class by submitting pre-recorded videos about specific topics. So for example, our fantastic copyright librarian recorded an overview of sourcing open data for text analysis in the class. And so this is a model, an example of one of my syllabi. It's the introductory class in digital humanities, and it follows the model I've been referencing for a project-based learning environment. It begins with the foundation of planning and understanding. It moves into hands-on work and interpretation, and then finally project building and display. And as you can see, it's very well delineated. It follows a simple logical path that students have no difficulty following along with. The final thing that I work quite hard on are my rubrics, which tend to be quite granular. I break down the topic into the assignment into very discrete tasks, which helps me and my TA grade effectively and fairly. But it also offers the students the scaffolding that they need to complete the work to a high standard. You know, if they follow each of the measures in the rubric, then they're going to do very well. It gives them a framework for building out their final project, their assignments, etc. So those are my top tips for project-based learning.
No, it's really a beautiful thing. I mean, looping back around by requesting your students do those reflections are really such a key component of project-based learning, and meets the demands of many of those literacy skills and being able to transfer skills across multiple disciplines. So this is really a great example of all of that. So Sarah, the semester is almost over, and faculty and support staff are going to look back and think, first of all, whoa, like what just happened in my online course? But what do you look for when it comes to feedback that influences how you improve your own courses? And how do you make changes accordingly?
Yeah, so the classes I teach, I mentioned that I've taught the Intro to DH class 8 times. It's been different every time because it evolves. And the reason for that is that I really do listen to the feedback that I get, particularly from the students in the class. I think it's good to set all ego aside as an instructor and to listen to feedback openly, to take it on board and to evolve and grow from it. I ask for feedback on a week-by-week basis. I will often use the polling function in Canvas. I offer, anonymous avenues for submitting weekly feedback, anonymous surveys, etc. And then I also do take the end of course evaluation very much on board. I've had some fantastic suggestions from students at the end of the class, which have really helped improve my online classroom. I think maintaining a flexible mindset, even in the face of the current situation we find ourselves in, is really critical. It's important to feel very much empowered as an instructor to adapt the syllabus if things are going either faster or slower than planned. And it's also important in planning and presentation of materials as well. And this goes hand in hand with that feedback aspect. If you get feedback, please go faster, please go slower, then you adapt and iterate for the next week. I've mentioned my conversations with faculty and librarians. I really, really value these. And I regularly look at faculty members' pages in other departments. I look at their bios, the classes that they're teaching, to see if there are any crossovers or parallels that might merit, me reaching out by email, further conversation, etc. And I've had some really fruitful conversations that way. More broadly, globally, I do follow a lot of scholars on Twitter, which has been, a really valuable platform for sourcing some fantastic teaching, pedagogical resources, historical resources, etc. But I do tend to be fairly rigorous, limit my time there, so I'm not doom scrolling, which seems to be the word du jour.
Yeah, I do find myself, especially when you get down a hashtag that really interests
Yes.
you in pedagogy, you keep on going. Yeah, no, this I like the polling idea too. I've used that in my classroom in order, well, mainly to maintain that flexible mindset, right? And to make sure that I'm accommodating for the different students in my class. I have used their reflections and those polling at the end of the class to make sure that the next class is better and that I'm accommodating for the questions that they've had regarding the content. So moving forward, what do you have? 3 pieces, 2 pieces, however many pieces of advice for faculty who are teaching online?
Yeah, I've thought about this very hard as well, and it boils down to using what you have at your disposal. And I would say that most institutions have done their very best to provide support, additional resources for online teaching, etc. So seek them out. Take a look at your library website. And do a deep dive, reach out to people. I would say that keeping the syllabus as simple as you possibly can will be doing everyone a favor in class, not least yourself. And it also enables ready adaptation should that need arise. I've been lucky enough to take one of the Library Juice Academy's classes on universal design for learning, and it made me think very carefully about offering multiple methods for engagement in the classroom, with the understanding that students have different ways of taking learning on board and navigating an online environment. And I do the best I can to try and meet all their needs. Obviously, this is a work in progress. I think it's unrealistic to say that you're going to revamp an entire class and make it all UDL compliant at the drop of a hat. I iterate each time I teach a class.
Yeah, and those multiple methods really can also take the form, especially when we're talking about universal design. It can take the form of providing diverse and multiple perspectives within the context of your course. So, not only do we have multimedia and photos and auditory and all of those different types, but we also make sure that our content, in order to be relevant to a variety of learners, and in order to ensure success of digital literacy, right, that they take, and there's a plane flying over, so I apologize if you can hear that. Make sure that you just provide multiple perspectives. And I think project-based learning in this, the reason why it's so important is because it provides the opportunity to take in different types of content, right, in that way. So.
Yeah, and I think my very final tip, since we're all sitting here on Zoom anyway, is to make sure that you feel comfortable with the online learning tool that you're working with, whatever it might be. You know, have a meeting with yourself, or have a family member dial in and just practice. Make sure you know where the chat function is, how folks can raise their hands, how to adjust settings in the preferences, and how to create breakout rooms, etc. So just, if you're comfortable navigating the system, then it is a huge weight. You won't be awake at 3 a.m. worrying about those particular aspects of classroom management. So it's worth taking a couple of hours and just digging around in the platform.
I think of the tech check as that when you're about to give a speech and you're looking yourself in the mirror and you're practicing to make sure you look okay, right? That's what I have the tendency to do when I'm setting up my especially synchronous courses. No, this is great. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. I do, for my pieces of advice for faculty and for our librarians on the call, I'll have Roger just pull up the slide that shows Gail's online learning handbook. This is a resource that we developed as a collaboration with marketing and all of our academic products, that allows our faculty and our librarians to see how our Gale resources fit in the context of an online learning environment. So we take you through in this infographic on the right hand side, the core components to instructional design. I've broken it down to be more bite-sized for our users and our audience so that it is manageable. And then we provide, within the context of the handbook, examples of a module that's built out using Gale resources, using the Gale Digital Scholar Lab, and other tips and tricks on how we can engage our students in a full end-to-end module, using discussions, using all of those core components and best practices for instructional design. So I encourage you to visit our online learning support page on Gale.com, and the website is right in the corner of the page, and you can also download these resources straight from our website. And I am also more than happy to converse with any of you on these best practices for online course development using our Gale resources. So with that said, that leaves us with about 7 minutes. Roger, did we have any remaining questions?
Yeah,
some burning questions?
We do have a couple that have come up, and I'll just frame them, really just two. And again, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Lindsay. Great overview of kind of where your experience and where things are going. I think one of them, Sarah, related to digital literacy, and you showed this slide where you have a lot of different types of majors in your courses. And so there's a question about, any recommendations, or did you find anything in terms of the different majors, whether they were humanities, social sciences, STEM side, in differences in you as an instructor being able to help them through that digital literacy piece?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously, as I mentioned, some students were a lot more comfortable navigating new technology than others. And so my goal for the students who were less comfortable in the environment was for them to reach the end of the class feeling confident and competent. So that involved me providing, walkthroughs in my office hours. I'd provide additional support for students who felt that they needed it, providing the handouts that they could take. I'd give, their work logs were a huge factor in this as well, because I was immediately able to see those who perhaps had a gap of in understanding or in comfort, and so the TA or myself could reach out to them and put together some working groups just to make sure that everybody was reaching the level that they would hope to reach in class. But yes, everyone was coming from a different starting point, but we were navigating as a cohort towards a defined endpoint, and we worked as a group to get there.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for that. The last question is for both of you, and this is probably a great ending question. So where do you see the future of online teaching going, knowing what you know right now, and what elements of what you've shown us today would you continue to incorporate into what that future may hold? And I know that's kind of a futuristic question, but a great ending one here.
I think online learning is definitely here to stay. It's not going anywhere, and it's proving to be beneficial in a lot of different ways, as far as increasing accessibility of learning opportunities for a variety of different learners, and also meeting the demands of situations like we find ourselves in right now. I think some of the things that we're going to need to keep in mind are, how are we going to continue to engage and interact with our students in the most effective way within our courses? And so, as Sarah described earlier, continuing to iterate on course development and design to be able to incorporate more discussion and reflection and interaction using Zoom or any other digital tools that allow you to have that level of interactivity will be essential to its success in the future, especially as we have an increasing amount of parents and even faculty and administrators who are worried about their return on investment, right? Are they really getting the most out of online learning? So continuing to grow on how we can create technologies and tools that facilitate that level of learning and interaction will be really important for the future of online learning.
Great.
And I'd just like to chime in briefly to say that, some of my concerns center around, equity of access. It's something that I think about a lot in my classes. I want every student to be able to access the materials and to have the same experience as their peers in the classroom. So this is something that I have focused on and would like to continue to focus on. How do I support every student according to their technological capabilities as well as their educational backgrounds? I think it's really important, and it's a question for this age, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you both, and this has been a great conversation. The last thing we wanted to leave you with, and this is just a look towards tomorrow for our next series on Behind the Screens. We do have 2 more planned, intersectional teaching approaches, where we'll have Professor Danielle DeMuth talking to us tomorrow about how she's integrating those teaching approaches with primary sources. And then also tomorrow afternoon, interdisciplinary curriculum and programming. And that should also be a great conversation with Professor Carrie Rasan from University of Connecticut. So please join us for those. There's still time to register. And with that, I want to wish everyone well and stay safe. And thank you again. Have a good day.